This is actually the cleanest that my kitchen has been in a while. This is my whole kitchen. So Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm did a video a couple weeks ago where she was on her friend's property and they were just talking about like what kind of property that her friend had and what her friend was kind of planning on doing with her property. I thought that was a really cool video, but one of the things that Jess had sort of mentioned is a forest property, and she had mentioned that, you know, developing a forest property is a little bit more difficult. She's not wrong. I have a forest property. We have 20 acres of forest, and we can tell you a little bit on how we are developing our property and some ways in which we are, you know, being self-sufficient on our 20-acre property. It's a lot. So we were really lucky. I'll tell you a little bit about the property first. So when we bought the property, and it's 20 acres, so it's not crazy large, but it is one of the larger parcels sort of in the area. And while there was a tiny portion that had been developed, you know, there is the main house on it. That main house has utilities. That main house is actually only on a tiny corner of the property. The rest of the property was completely undeveloped. No structures built, no services or utilities running through here, which really had the benefit of creating like a blank canvas for us. So we really appreciated it. We got really lucky. Some of the features of the property is that while we can develop a really good portion of it, we actually can't develop maybe just under half of it. And I'll tell you why. We have a ravine that runs through sort of the center of the property, and it's quite a steep ravine. There's very steep hills. So through a lot of the property is very steep hillside. So we can't develop that at all. We need to keep the trees on the hillside of the property to prevent the hillside from collapsing. But that's okay. We don't need to develop all 20 acres of the property. And in fact, we don't want to do that anyway. A lot of my friends have, you know, properties that are very similar to us. Oftentimes they are like super treed. We're in the Rocky Mountains, which is incredibly beautiful, but is not necessarily conducive for, I would say, the average person to raise beef. But some people do. There are cows here. They're so fuzzy right now. They're so cute. People do raise animals though, so that's the first point that I want to get to. Now, the animals that they raise tend not to be beef. Like I said, the average person around here doesn't raise cows. What they do raise, chickens, of course, goats and sheep. So a lot of folks raise goats for their milk. And then my coworker actually raises sheep so that she can shear them, and then she makes wool out of them that she sells at the markets. So there's that. People also raise pigs around here, and people raise rabbits. One of my friends raises rabbits around here, and he like breeds them, and so some of them he'll sell for like pets, but others he harvests them for their fur and their meat. Now, you can start a garden. Everyone has gardens here. We have a really, really big garden that we're always expanding, and so starting a garden is the same as starting a garden anywhere. The only thing is that you just have to, like I wouldn't be able to plant a garden behind me, for example, because in this area in particular, we haven't cut down any trees, so we haven't cleared any space. So what we did with our larger garden is we had to clear a ton of space. Now, it's not too crazy. We tried to pick a space for the garden that was already sort of fairly clear anyway. That way we're not, clearing some of our more treed portions of the land. You can absolutely start a garden in the forest. Around here, even though we're in Canada, and I know it looks like it's winter wonderland behind me, and it is, but we actually generally have fairly mild weather here. Yes, we get a lot of snow, and yes, it is like below zero. Like right now, the temperature is around -4, -5, but we generally don't get super cold temperatures like we did, like let's say in the prairies. So we're talking like -30, -35, -40, or -50 degree temperatures. Here, apples can grow really easily. We have a whole bunch of fruit trees. Like lavender grows really easily. Like it's so much easier to grow things here because the climate is so mild. The third and probably most obvious thing, if you have a forest property, there's lots of firewood. If you heat your home with wood like I do, I only heat my tiny home with my tiny wood stove. This is where I get my wood from. So you can harvest a ton of wood from your property. And because we have 20 acres, we have such a large parcel. If we manage our property and our harvesting appropriately, then we will always have enough firewood to last, both my tiny house and eventually my parents down at the main house. They don't heat with wood yet, but they are going to be building a house this year, and then they will be heating with wood hopefully next year or whenever that gets built. Also, you have the added bonus. So the type of trees that we have here we have a lot of fir, we have some spruce, we have a lot of fir, we have pine, we have some birch, not a whole lot of birch, and we have a ton of cedar. Now, cedar is not good to burn inside in your wood stove. You can use it for kindling if you want to. A lot of locals actually will make like little packages made out of cedar for kindling, but otherwise cedar can't be used for burning in the wood stove, but cedar can be used for building. My entire deck on my tiny house, now my deck is really small, but it's all made out of cedar that we have harvested and milled right from the property. So you can also have, in addition to using, your forest to heat your home, you can also, mill and either use your wood for building, random projects around your property. I mean, sheds and wood sheds and barns and whatever else. The kind of stuff always needs to be built. So you can do that, or you can sell your wood. I mean, we all know that building supplies is really, really, really expensive right now. The fourth thing that we are doing on our property is we are actually encouraging wildlife. It's home to a ton of wildlife. We already have a lot of stories, but I'll start with bears. Right now it's wintertime, the bears are sleeping. we don't have to worry about bears at all. But in the springtime, summertime, and fall time, of course, especially in the spring and fall, so in the spring when the bears are first waking up, and in the fall time when most of the food from the higher mountains has been picked over, we get a ton of bear activity around the house. Now, I didn't have a whole lot of bear activity directly around the tiny house because I'm very, 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 very careful on keeping, food and everything all locked up and put away so that we don't have to worry about that during the summer. But the bears go through our property. They come down our driveway. And actually, they didn't go down this path because I'm standing quite close to the tiny house. So they don't necessarily come down this path, but to my left, they will come down the driveway because I watched bears do this last year. And they actually come through the forest a little bit to my left here. And right behind me is where there's sort of our hiking trail. So the area behind me, I can develop this immediate space, but if we were to walk, I don't know, 100 paces that way, then we get into more of our sort of hiking area. I have my archery range down there, and the bears love that space down there because there's no development down there. That's a space that we can't develop anyway, and bears are super, super, super useful because they will encourage decomposition of your forest. They will overturn logs, which can be a little bit freaky when you're walking down there and you see a giant tree that you've had to step over, and suddenly that giant tree is moved and the bear has torn it apart because they're looking for, grubs and other food. But bears will encourage decomposition in your forest. They'll encourage logs and everything to break down faster. So good. Some other wildlife we have is deer. Deer are super, super common. We want to encourage them as well. We can use the deer poop as fertilizer in our garden as long as it's processed correctly. So we've done that. We have a ton of deer poop all around our property all the time. In the winter time, there's actually rabbit tracks everywhere, especially around my tiny house. I don't really know what they do for the environment in particular, but if I know anything about nature, they have some sort of role that I'm just not familiar with. And so I love seeing the rabbit tracks all around my house. Maui luckily hasn't chased them, thank goodness. And of course we have all sorts of birds. Now, a couple weeks ago, I also mentioned that we found a deer carcass on the property. So we do have something that is hunting deer, most likely a cat, either a cougar or a bobcat, which that is super, super cool. Now, I have not seen them. I'm not afraid of a whole lot of wildlife around here. Even bears, bears are super easy. I'm not afraid of them. But the big cats, especially the cougars, definitely a little bit nervous. I definitely shine my flashlight into the forest to look for little beady eyes. We also do tend to have coyotes. We don't necessarily have coyotes directly on the property, but I do hear them at nighttime. You can hear them yipping. So we want to encourage wildlife. And because there's huge swaths of the property that we are not able to develop, those swaths of property will always be wildlife corridors. That way wildlife will always cross through our land. Something that we always want to encourage. And finally, the fifth thing that we're doing is you can build a water feature. We actually have a culvert that is right next to our driveway. I've shown footage of it before. We started to dig a trench by hand, mind you, last year to try and encourage some of the water away from our driveway, because we're a little bit concerned that eventually that water will wash out our driveway, which would be really unfortunate because it was not cheap to put in. Now, water on your property has so many benefits. So ideally, we want to keep this water on our property as long as possible. We just want to slow down the flow of it off of our property. It will flow off of our property and that's okay, but we want to encourage it to stay on as long as we can. It's really, really good for your soil. It can encourage plant growth and biodiversity. And so you can absolutely build a water feature. So those are just some of the things that we are doing to be self-sustainable in our forest homestead. If you have a forest homestead, what kind of things do you do with it? How are you developing it? How are you, self-sufficient? I would love to hear about that.